On GED Social Studies, you may have to find the correct historical context for a question, but just look to the date they give you. For this one, it happens in 2001. What was the most important thing that happened in the US in 2001? It was definitely the September 11th terrorist attacks, or 9/11. So knowing this event happened in 2001, that can help us find the correct answer, or why this law was designed in the first place. Okay, let's go ahead and read it. This information summarizes some of the intended goals of the USA Patriot Act that was passed in 2001. The first one, improve information sharing between government agencies. The next one, strengthen law enforcement's investigative powers. And the third one, increase access to electronic records through search warrants. So even if we're not sure what they're talking about exactly, we do know the historical context, so we could answer which conclusion is best supported by this information and its historical context. The first one, the law was designed to stop illegal immigration. Well, they don't talk about immigration happening, and again, we know that's probably not the most important thing here, so it's probably not the first one. The next one, the law was intended to limit criminal online activity. Now, in 2001, the internet was becoming very popular, so maybe criminal online activity needed to be limited. But again, that doesn't really jump out as the historical context here. The third one, the law was intended to prevent future terrorist attacks. So just like we thought, that definitely relates directly to 9/11, and that's why this law was passed. To do all of these things in order to prevent future terrorist attacks. So C, that's the correct one, and that definitely matches the date that we're given the best here. Okay, let's look at some other time periods here. This one's asking about a historical event. Once again, just look to the date they give us, 1945. What was going on in the US during this time? Well, we were involved in World War II. You don't need to know the exact dates, but from 1939 to 1945. So it's probably about the war. Let's go ahead and read it and see what they're talking about. This excerpt is from a US government official in 1945. We knew that whatever decision we made would carry enormous consequences. We believed our choice could help end the war, but it would also shape the future of international relations. All right, so they're making a choice. It's going to help end the war. It'll also shape the future of international relations. Basically, relationships between countries in the future. So what's an event that would do both of these things? Let's read the options. The first one, the decision to use the atomic bomb. Now, the atomic bomb, it was developed during this time, and it was intended to help end the war. But also, it did shape the future of relationships between countries, and that's what the Cold War was primarily about. What would happen when other countries also got atomic bombs or nuclear weapons? So A, this definitely seems to fit really well. The next one, the beginning of the space race. Now, that was the race to see which country could get to space first, and maybe it could shape some relationships between countries, but it probably wouldn't end the war getting to space first. So maybe, but doesn't seem quite right. The third one, the decision to stop the military draft. Now, a military draft is requiring people to join the military, but stopping the military draft would mean you'd have less soldiers. It probably wouldn't end the war, and it wouldn't really affect other countries as much either. So, not too sure about that one. Okay, the last one, the economic hardships of the Great Depression. Is that the historical event? Well, this was when the country had a really difficult time financially. But again, it doesn't really have to do with the war as much. So, probably not. But like we said, the atomic bomb, that was dropped twice during the war, and it helped end the war, and it definitely shaped the future of politics around the world or international relations. So A, the decision to use the atomic bomb in 1945. That's the correct historical event here. Okay, let's keep looking. This time, which historical events are we talking about? In the 1860s. We've got 1861, 1864, and the main thing going on in the 1860s was the Civil War in the United States. But it wasn't very united because it was the northern states in blue here versus the southern states in red, and we were fighting a war over several years. Primarily, it was over the issue of slavery. The South wanted to keep slavery and form their own country, but the North wanted to keep the country united or together. Okay, let's see these quotes here. Well, the first one, it is from a Southern newspaper, so somebody down here. Let's see what they have to say. The Southern states have chosen to govern themselves according to their own laws. Our independence must be defended against outside control. Okay, let's see here. They talk about governing themselves and their independence. That is referencing forming a separate country and leaving the United States. That would allow them to govern themselves, keep their own laws, keep slavery, and be an independent country on their own. Okay, so that's that. Let's look at the next one. This is from a Union soldier's letter. Now, anytime you see Union, they're talking about the North. These are just names for the same thing here. Another name for the South is the Confederacy. So this can help with the context if you see these terms. Okay, so this person from the North, what did they want here? The hardships of war are great, but I believe our sacrifices will help preserve the nation for future generations. Now, to preserve something is to save it. So to save the nation is another way to say to keep the country together or to keep it united. That was generally the North's goal in the war. Okay, so what is each author's point of view? Well, the second one wants to keep the country together. The first one wants to form a separate country, and those are definitely opposite goals, separate and together. But the last one did talk about that. Each author was shaped by opposing goals in a divided nation. So D, this is the correct option, based on the historical events of the Civil War. But the other answers mention things like both authors believed the nation should remain united, but only the second author thought the country should remain together or united, not the first one. So we know that's no good. The second one, each author agreed on the same solution to the conflict. Well, they don't have the same solution, right? Together and separate. Those are definitely opposite goals, not the same. So we could get rid of that. And then the third one, both authors wanted the southern states to rejoin the Union. But the problem is the first person from the southern newspaper, they wanted to govern themselves and have their own independence. That's the opposite of joining the Union and forming a United States. So this one's not right either. But that's where knowing the historical event of the 1860s helps a lot. We know the Civil War was going on. It was a divided nation. So it makes sense that somebody from the North and somebody from the South would definitely have opposing goals here. What's the historical context in 1935? Well, we saw right after this in 1940, that was World War II. But during the 1930s, that was the Great Depression in the US. Basically, a bunch of people losing their jobs, their savings, and having a hard time finding work. So this occurred from 1929 to roughly 1939, or the 1930s, basically. Okay, let's see what they say. This excerpt is from a federally employed construction worker. Instead of standing in a bread line, let's pause there. Standing in a bread line, it's basically like a soup kitchen or receiving free food. That's what they're talking about. Okay, so instead of standing in a bread line, I now spend my days building schools and roads. Having steady work has restored my sense of purpose. Having steady work, that's the same thing as having a steady job. or steady income. Okay, so it seems like they're kind of getting out of the Great Depression. They didn't have a job, and now they have one. So things are better. They have a restored sense of purpose here. So the question, how did the historical context shape this worker's point of view? The first one, just look at the beginnings of each of these here. Strong economic growth. We don't even need to read the rest of it. This period of time did not have strong economic growth because it was a depression, things were not going well. So the first one, that's not right. The next one talks about an economic crisis. That's where people are losing their jobs and such. And that is what the Great Depression was about. Businesses struggling, folks not being able to work. That's an economic crisis. So that does match. The third one, rising factory profits. But rising profits, your company's making a lot of money, and that wasn't what was going on here. So the third one, probably not. And then the last one, increased trade. Well, if the economy is doing really well, you'll probably have increased trade, but probably not again during this time period. So that whittles it down all the way to B, and this is the correct one. The economic crisis led him to support government job programs. Well, what is that second part even talking about? What's a government job? In the very beginning, they say this excerpt is from a federally employed construction worker. Basically, they were employed by the federal government, or the government gave them their job. So it makes sense why they would support government jobs, because this construction worker has a government job here. So it makes sense that they would support them. It is an economic crisis. That is the historical context for this quote right here. So B, there's multiple parts that support this one. And it looks like the government kind of stepped in, people lost their jobs, but then these government jobs were opening up so that people could then have steady work. So that makes more sense now. What's a historical circumstance that happened in 1902? You might be thinking, there's just too many dates to memorize. But really, it's not too bad. There's only about 5 or 6 time periods that they often ask about. So just stick with it, and you'll be fine for this one too. Now, during this time, or from about the 1870s to the 1900s, you had large monopolies, or very powerful companies taking over. Think of Google, Amazon, Meta. That's what was happening during this time with the steel industry, the oil industry, railroads, things like that. But basically, the problem is it puts little businesses out of work. So that's what the president is going to address here. How do we solve the issue of large companies or powerful monopolies? Let's see. This excerpt summarizes a speech by President Teddy Roosevelt in 1902. Great corporations have become a powerful part of our economy. Honest businesses deserve to succeed, but those that abuse their power must be subject to government oversight and the law. Right off the bat, he talks about great corporations, or big businesses. They're becoming a bit too powerful. And the problem is, when they abuse their power, then the government needs to provide some oversight. Basically, the government to ensure that they're following laws and not abusing their power. So he does seem to be talking about large monopolies and making sure they don't get too powerful. Okay, which one talks about that? The first one? Growing immigration led him to limit industrial growth. But immigration, or people moving to the country, doesn't seem to be the main thing that he's worried about right here. That might have been a historical circumstance during this time period, but he's not really talking about immigrants, so probably not. The next one? Growing trade led him to support higher tariffs. Do we have growing trade? Maybe, but again, he doesn't mention trade anywhere, so probably not either. The third one? Growing monopolies. But growing monopolies, those are the same thing as great corporations becoming powerful. They could definitely abuse their power and need the government to step in here. So, growing monopolies led him to support more business regulation. But what does business regulation look like? Well, basically, the government might step in and make sure that the business can only get so big so it can't keep buying other companies along the way. And it can provide other rules, laws, or oversight. So, C, this is definitely what he's talking about, and that's the correct historical circumstance for this question. But notice, we didn't even need to know that large monopolies happened during this time. You could still use the context clues of the question to figure it out without knowing that there. But another word they might use instead of monopolies is this one, trusts. Basically, these are companies that get together to try to form a more powerful company. And you could basically think of it as a monopoly. So if you see monopolies or trusts, basically talking about the same thing, giant corporations that become a bit too powerful and they tend to abuse their power. So just keep an eye out for this word as well. And let's finish with one last time period here. This time, what's the historical context for 1963? Now, you could always have multiple things going on, of course. So there was the Cold War. This was basically the US trying to contain communism and stop countries from becoming communist. It was also the fear of other countries having nuclear weapons. But the other thing going on in the 1960s was the civil rights movement. And civil rights refers to trying to end legalized segregation or to prevent racial discrimination. Basically, equal rights for all citizens is the goal. Okay, so which of these is he talking about here? Again, this is a speech given by President John F. Kennedy in 1963. This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. The rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Okay, so he's talking about people of many nations and backgrounds, and the rights of every person are diminished when the rights of one person are threatened. That definitely sounds like civil rights going on. We need to provide legal protections for all people. Okay, so that's probably it here. Let's take a look at the answers. A. The Cold War led him to focus on containing communism. Well, we know it could be the Cold War, but there's no mention of communism. Usually they would mention democracy and trying to promote that over communism, but they don't mention any of that. So probably not A. B. The growth of the middle class led him to expand housing opportunities. Now again, this very well could have been going on as well, but he doesn't talk about the middle class or housing. Probably not that either. So let's keep looking. Rapid suburban growth led him to encourage school construction. That's possible as well, but it doesn't really sound like civil rights either, though. But the last one, the civil rights movement led him to support civil rights legislation. We knew that the civil rights movement was happening during this time, and supporting civil rights legislation, that means laws. Basically, laws protecting equal rights for all people. That's what he's supporting. This sounds like the correct historical context. So the civil rights movement was the main thing that this quote has to do with. We need to pass laws because the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. So people of different races and backgrounds all need to be protected, and that's primarily what this quote is talking about, the civil rights movement. Here are some historical timelines questions for some practice with those, and check out my website for practice problems on all 4 GED subjects. Let me know what questions you have, what else you want me to cover. Good luck, you got these. We'll see you in the next video. Toodles.